games in the Legend of Zelda franchise usually aren't just games. They're events. They're experiences. They are these huge tentpole titles in a franchise that has spanned well over 30 years and is regarded by most to be a top 5 franchise in all of video games. When a Zelda game comes out, it's a big deal. So you would be forgiven if all you thought about were those big games. And most of my guests, that's what we think about, myself included. It's easy to find someone who loves Link to the Past. It's not too hard to find somebody who was enthralled with Ocarina. And yeah, Breath of the Wild has its fans and quite a few detractors. So on this episode of A Gamer Looks at 40, we are going to look at some of those lesser known but equally interesting titles that were scaled down to the palm of our hands, but no less beloved or more importantly fun than their big console brethren. Time to charge up our batteries, plug in our headphones, and sneak underneath the covers for some late night gaming as we explore Zelda on the go, the handheld games.
Zelda returns to Game Boy Color in an adventure too big for just one game. Rated E for everyone, each game sold separately.
Get into it.
Now, longtime listeners of the show may be thinking, Bill, didn't we do The Adventure of Link a few months ago? Wasn't that like a November game? And there was, I think, 1 or 2 episodes on it. It was a big deal. Well, yeah. And if you ask most people, that's the handheld game that really define Zelda handheld games. But in this episode, we are going to dig a little deeper into those lesser known titles that may not be as important, but were definitely just as fun for the most part. On February 27th, 2001, about 8 months after the release of Majora's Mask on the N64, the Game Boy Color, the little console that could, received 2 sibling Zelda titles to call their very own: Zelda Oracle of Ages and Zelda Oracle of Seasons. The Lord Reverend D starts us off by dropping some knowledge about these lesser known but pretty neat games. And then Phoebe, also known as the Let's Play Princess, joins the show for the first time to share her opinions on this Game Boy Color 1-2 punch.
The original plan with the Oracle series was it was going to be 3 games. This was from a deal between Nintendo and Capcom to make a series of Zelda games, including a remake of the very first Zelda game available on the Game Boy Color. Because of just shenanigans and time constraints and everything, they cut it down to 2 games and kind of scrapped the remake of the first Zelda game. What they did utilize was some of the assets from that and put that into Oracle of Seasons, which is why you'll see that a lot of the sprites and a lot of the bosses and everything look like something from Zelda 1, versus Oracle of Ages, which has basically brand new assets and sprites and everything. But the 2 games were originally, like, the plan was it was based off the Triforce, courage, wisdom, power, and right. Each game was supposed to have its own individual flavor. So Oracle of Seasons was supposed to be more action-based. Oracle of Ages was supposed to be more puzzle-based. Having played them, that's mostly true. The puzzles are a little bit better in Oracle of Ages. That's the one that I originally went with when I first bought the games, because going back to the weapons and the items and everything, it just had more appealing stuff to me, just the stuff that it had in it. So I ended up playing Ages first and then Seasons later on. What's really cool is that while they are separate adventures, they are linked together, as originally they were going to have the 3 games. But what they did was they put in a password system. So say you play Oracle of Seasons first. At the end of the game, you get a password that you can input into Oracle of Ages. And that changes certain dialogues and certain encounters and various aspects around the world. So the games are meant to be played, and then you could play one one and then the other, and the stories will complement each other. The final boss in each one has its own distinct flavor and everything, but if you have the password in there, you get an extra boss fight with Twin Rova and then Ganon, and you find out that they're the ones pulling the strings.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, it was a really ingenious system at the time.
Wow, yeah. Wow. So it sounds like you could have a very full experience playing one or the other, but playing both, you get this nice, cohesive, complete play experience.
Yes, you get a extra dungeon at the end too. That's it's only slightly different in whichever version you're playing second, but it's like meant for hardcore players. Like it's got really strong puzzles, really strong monsters. But it's one of those things where, like, if you're a completionist, this is what you want to strive for.
That's the goal. Okay, very cool.
Yep.
So are there apart from the kind of duality of the two games, are there any interesting gameplay flourishes they added, like items and things like that?
Well, Oracle of Ages had a siege shooter, which was pretty spiffy, and Oracle of Seasons had the slingshot that you would find in like Ocarina of Time, but with the siege shooter, you could angle it so you could bounce seeds off the walls in order to hit targets. So it required you to plan a little bit better. And then they actually did a good job with the time travel aspect of that, because when you changed things in the past, it did affect things in the present when you moved forward.
Oh, have fun.
Oh yeah. So I mean, like planting seeds in the past, you come forward into the present, and boom, there's a tree, and you're able to get items.
Very cool. And how far in the future is that are the past and present world?
I believe it's a couple hundred years.
Couple hundred? Okay, cool. This year's 400. 400 seems to be like a nice round number for like time travel years. I just think it's like it's far enough away where nothing can be really the same, but if it's too close, like 100 years, like things are pretty much the same 100 years. No, I shouldn't say that. That's not the case. But, you know, I mean, it's 400 is like a nice number of years to be.
It's about a standard for a time travel story.
Yeah, that's funny. It's kind of like standard time travel-y stuff. That's like the nice mean to have. Yeah, so let's kind of jump into the topic we're here to kind of discuss for the main point is Oracle of Seasons. Now, you've really expressed a real fondness for the Oracle game, so I'd love to hear your history with it and why it hit you in that really special way.
So, I'm the weird person who seems to have everything based off of the Oracle games. I had the strategy guide that flipped 180 upside down, so that way one side was the Ages guide and one side was the Oracle guide. I had the choose your own adventure books for the games.
Wow, I didn't even know that existed. Okay.
Yeah. So a big proponent of it is the password system. The idea that this adventure doesn't just end with one game, that there are these two evil forces that combined are the way to summon Ganon again. And that interconnected plot, with each game having their own fantastic plots that are two halves of a whole, was amazing. And honestly, Ages is one of the best. I feel like Ages is more of a puzzle Zelda game.
Okay.
And Seasons is more of the adventure type, because I want to say Seasons at one point started off as a Game Boy Color remake of the original NES version.
Oh, really? Oh,
and
I didn't know
the
that.
bosses even carry over.
Okay, sure. Okay, yeah.
But funny enough, Ages has still one of the best time travel plots I've ever seen. The villain possesses different characters throughout the story. You don't know who you can trust anymore, and people that you were trusting the entire game become the main villain by the end. It's definitely an interesting, something that we have never really seen in another Zelda game as far as I remember.
Yeah, and isn't it incredible what they were able to do with the Game Boy Color? I mean, we're talking about Game Boy games here. Like, that's Mario Land and Tetris. You know, you wouldn't expect that.
Yeah, I loved
that.
Link's Awakening, but I think
Sure.
I like the Oracle games more, and part of it is a technicality thing, because they have, just in seasons alone, that's 4 different versions of the overworld map, one for each season.
Right. That's a big deal. And this is also in the time of Game Boy where, Pokemon, of course, was a major thing. So you always had 2 games per. So it kind of makes sense you would have that for Zelda. But to have each one really fleshed out in this really incredible way is frankly incredible. What would you say to somebody who, it's now, when it's coming in the next wave, what would you say to somebody who now has the opportunity to play this for the first time? Like to say, hey, you have a lot of options now on the Nintendo Switch Online. Why should someone start that up? And which one should they start with? I think is the better question.
Oh, between Ages and Seasons, you mean?
Yeah.
I think Seasons is an easier game to get into. Again, because Ages is more on the puzzly side, and Seasons is more on the dungeons exploration side.
And does Seasons Seasons is a little more traditional, you think?
Yeah, I would say so.
Next up, Seth Sturgill of the All End podcast shares his opinions on Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons.
Yeah, it was weird. I don't know that I really understood that there were multiple versions of it. I think I kind of just approached it the same way I did with Pokemon, and I just got the blue one. So for me, I got Oracle of Ages when I was a kid, and yeah, it has those similar vibes. It has those similar vibes of like, this is a little world, that exists in my pocket on my Game Boy. And yeah, it definitely isn't in the same vein as Link's Awakening. It doesn't really have anything to say. You're not going to leave the Oracle games kind of feeling this weight of everything that just happened. It's a much more traditional, I would say, Zelda adventure. The main kind of differences between the games is like, one is a little bit more puzzle heavy than the other. The games do connect. They wanted you to buy both versions of the game, and there's like these linked passwords, and in order to get like the true ending of the game, you do have to see like the linked game ending and things, which,
Right.
it was very typical of that time. But yeah, I really love them. I think the dungeons are very strong. I think that the sort of like layout of the world is good. The music's great. It's definitely one, and I think a lot of people did kind of sleep on it. And in that sort of time, we're talking about these sort of like, again, kind of off-center Zelda games, these like Capcom Zelda games that start. You got this, and you got Minish Cap, and these games are made by Capcom. This wasn't a Nintendo developed thing. And so I think there's a little bit of that too. It didn't feel off to me. When I was playing it as a kid, I didn't realize that it wasn't Nintendo made.
So if someone were to try to get into Oracle, is there enough difference between the two to make them both worth playing, or are there just like some like differences? Kind of, again, this is coming from somebody who's never touched it and probably won't have time.
Sure, yeah,
to like look at
they
them,
are.
yeah.
They're different games. They're definitely different games. So, they each have kind of like these. Like in most Zelda games, they have like the core item. So in Oracle of Seasons, the big kind of like gimmick is that you change the season. So if there's like water, in the summertime or springtime season or whatever, you change the season to winter, and all of a sudden it's ice and you can walk on it, right? It's stuff like that, and the game plays with that. That's kind of the core mechanic of that. Meanwhile, in Oracle of Ages, you've got this harp that goes between kind of the past and the present, and
Right.
you have like time portal. It plays with time, and it's a little bit more puzzle heavy than Oracle of Seasons is. So they are very different games, even though it's like kind of the same, overworld and things like that. It's they're similar, but they do have different core concepts. And I would say that, and this is why, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, this is why I really hope that they just sort of combine everything and
Sure.
make it a whole new thing in that sort of Link's Awakening remake style, because it is really cool. And I would just love people to have the opportunity to play that. I think the most accessible way to play it legally now would be on 3DS Virtual Console. But even that, when we get to March, that's going away.
Yeah,
so
you're right. Absolutely.
We need a more accessible way to play stuff like this. I hope it comes to like NSO or something.
Yeah,
I don't want to
NSO would be
lose
perfect.
this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, NSO would be perfect, I think, for that style. Which one do you think is, and again, they sound very much so like complementary pieces, right? And I which is a good thing. Which do you think would be the strongest of the two?
Maybe this is just bias because this is the one that I played originally, but I prefer Oracle of Ages. Personally, like that's just kind of more, it's more puzzle focused. Season is a little bit more like action focused. And they're both good. They're both, and one thing I really like about the Capcom Zelda games in general is they kind of tackled like weird concepts like this. Minish Cap is an extraordinarily weird Zelda game on the GBA, and it was, these games were directed by Fujibayashi, who would go on to return to the director's chair for Breath of the Wild and now Tears of the Kingdom. So
right.
Like this guy has got this like kind of penchant for these weird kind of core concepts and taking like central things that feel like a part of a grander scope. Gun to my head, I would go Oracle of Ages just for my personal taste, but I think that there's an argument to be made for both of them.
Absolutely. No, that's cool. And I think and again, there's something pretty neat about that. And again, I don't remember offhand when those were released.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. Like you mentioned, kind of like that Pokemon where it's kind of like red and blue, and
I think it was pretty late. I think it was pretty late I think it was like early 2000s, like sort of right before GBA kind of hit.
Okay, so relatively late in that life cycle. Now, while Oracle of Seasons and Ages has its fans, and those fans love that game, no title that I discussed for this Handheld episode was praised higher than Minish Cap. Released in 2004 for the Game Boy Advance, this Capcom-built game is frankly celebrated almost as much as that high watermark we know as Link's Awakening. So let's chat with three people who adore this game and are not afraid to share their opinions. Starting us off is Christian from the Franchise Festival podcast, followed by longtime friend of the show, Ian, aka TeacherBloke85 on Twitter, and finally Jodi, aka Backwheel on Twitter. Another game, though, you've stated you really love, and top is Minish Cap.
Mm-hmm.
This is a game I have almost no history with, interaction with, really anything with. What about Minish Cap is, well, first off, your first experiences with it, and then kind of why is it so high up there for you?
So I first played Minish Cap on the Wii U, which is a strange entry point to it. But I think the Wii U is kind of a unique test case for it, because obviously Minish Cap couldn't be played on the big screen when it first came out. It was a Game Boy Advance game. So unless you had that Game Boy Advance adapter for the GameCube, you couldn't play it up on the big screen. And it looks really nice on an HD TV, in my opinion. A lot of games don't scale well, but the Minish Cap, as long as you're willing to put up with some kind of pixel scaling quirks, like the colors really pop in it. It's got a really vibrant world, and the animation quality of the sprites in it is frankly unparalleled in a sprite-based Zelda game.
Wow, really?
Yeah, that's a big part of what I love about it. And you would expect Nintendo to have done more of that, but it's a Capcom-made game. There are a few minor mechanical updates as well on the traditional Zelda formula that I think make Minish Cap really sing. One of them is that you have a dedicated hint button. You can ask the cap itself for a hint on where to go next, which I think elides a lot of the friction of earlier Zelda games. And you can roll There's because you have shoulder buttons on the Game Boy Advance, there's a dedicated button for rolling in the game world, which makes
cool.
navigation is much faster in it. So there's just a lot of little updates that I think maybe Minish Cap doesn't traditionally get enough credit for, but I would place it as the most mechanically successful sprite-based 2D Zelda game.
That's high praise. That's really, really high praise considering the league it's in. That's what I learned that recently through these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think being a Capcom game, clearly it helped things because it's a game you love. Where can you see that influence though? If you can at all.
It's a little hard to say, truth be told. And I've really kind of closely examined the game when we were playing it for our show. And Capcom, of course, has a rich history of sprite work. You know, they've got the Mega Man games, which have, in my opinion, maybe the best sprite work on the NES. Maybe even a little bit higher quality than what Nintendo was putting out at the time. But Nintendo has, Super Mario World. It has Link to the Past. Nintendo has a really rich history of sprite work as well. So it's a little bit hard to tell. The other thing is that Capcom had also produced the Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons games, which pretty much just bring over the graphics engine from Link's Awakening DX. But I'm not sure where the game engine for Minish Cap comes from. I think maybe that was a Capcom original, and that's why they were able to stretch their legs a little bit and get outside of the kind of box that they'd been placed in for Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons.
Sure.
One of the interesting touch points for Minish Cap is that it seems to try to approximate Wind Waker's aesthetic in a sprite-based format, which is
like very colorful
exactly.
and yeah.
Yeah, it ultimately has kind of limited success. You'd see much better Wind Waker recreations in Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks for whatever issues exist with them. I think the art direction's on point.
Sure.
But Minish Cap does something kind of interesting. You know what I would relate it to is, I don't know if you've seen that Bloodborne remake, but
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it though.
Yeah, it's basically Bloodborne for the PlayStation 4 recreated as though it was a PlayStation 1 game.
It's neat.
It's incredible. Demaking something that exists on modern consoles and shifting it back to an earlier generation is a really interesting process. And I think Capcom did a really great job at that with Minish Cap because it approximates certain elements of the outsized and colorful format of Wind Waker, but does it in an entirely unique way. And just the sprites in that they're so well articulated. It's rare to see that level of animation and articulation on sprites prior to the 2010s when a lot of indie developers started doing them. You know, you get things like Eastward or Shovel Knight, that sort of thing. But back on a portable console in the mid-2000s, it was very rare to see that level of craftsmanship in the sprite work. So I think that's a big part of what I love about Minish Cap.
All right, so now let's kind of pivot to kind of further on the lineage. Next up, now have you ever played while I have somebody who loves Zelda? Have you ever played some of the weird ones like Four Swords or Minish Cap? Like
I love the weird Zeldas.
Okay. I don't know where these are going to slot in as far as the show goes, but it's hard to find people who have a lot of experience.
All right.
Minish. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say the Minish Cap you say is a weird one. That is one of my favourite Zelda games.
I've heard that like online and such. I haven't interviewed a lot of people about those games, but I've heard that take.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful Zelda game, and I don't know. I want to say it was Capcom that was behind it, but I'm not 100% certain on that.
I do have the power of the internet and editing capabilities. Let's see. Yeah, developed by Capcom. Well done. Well done.
Yay.
Nailed it.
But yeah,
that was a Game Boy Advance game. See, I know nothing about this game. And here I am talking about it on a podcast.
Oh my
Please,
gosh.
help enlighten me.
Minish Cap is just wonderful in every single way. It's in a way, I kind of think of it as not really a follow-up to Link's Awakening, but follow-up to the Oracle games, which I also loved. Oracle of Ages, Oracle of Seasons, brilliant, brilliant games. And then, the next logical step was a full Game Boy Advance game, because that is my personal love, is the top-down Zelda games. They are my true love, really, in terms of the series. I love the 3D Zelda games, but where it's at for me is the top-downs. And Minish Cap is just beautiful in its artwork all the way through it. The dungeon designs are fantastic. The way, again, you've got the two worlds. You've got the world where you're regular size and then the world where you're small or diminished. Fantastic. And then that kind of paved the way for your DS games with Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, which, again, I love. But Minish Cap, to me, is... I would say it's in my top 5 Zeldas.
Really? That's interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
And considering, I know I keep alluding to it, and I keep saying that does include the fact that Breath of the Wild isn't even in my top 10.
Come on. All right, listen.
Controversial, I know.
It's extremely controversial. I don't know if I can get into this now. So I'm looking through Minish Cap, and again, this is one of those things I'd like to play all of these before I talk to people, but as we all know, time is a factor. A gamer looks at 40.
I would say
22.
if you do have a little bit of time, Minish Cap, get it to the top of your playlist. I will say the last boss in Minish Cap gave me more trouble than the last boss in most games.
Interesting.
And I can't remember why.
We also want to mention a game that you cite as probably your favorite, among your favorites, maybe second favorite, I think you said.
It's my second, after Zelda 2, is Minish Cap.
Yeah, Minish Cap. So tell me a bit about how you discovered Minish Cap, especially since you hadn't really played one from between Zelda 2 and Wind Waker. Where does Minish Cap fall in there?
So, yeah, I was thinking, that I went Wind Waker and then Twilight Princess. But actually, that's not quite true, because I played Minish Cap in between. I forgot. My nephew had lent it to me because he had a Game Boy, and we were always trading back Game Boy games. And yeah, he gave me Minish Cap. And I really fell in love with that game. Just the dungeons were so interesting. I've never done anything like that. The dungeons in number 2 are very unique to number 2. There's no other game there that like Adventure Link. And the dungeons in Wind Waker, they were 3D, there was a lot of puzzles involved, but not the same kind. So like Minish Cap, and after going back and playing A Link to the Past later, I think there's a lot of A Link to the Past in Minish Cap, in the dungeon design and the ideas that are there. And I think that's what I fell in love with that game. And it's still, other than my original touch, because I love Adventure Link, there's just something to that game that I guess is nostalgia maybe. But sure. Minish Cap is probably my second favorite.
Cool. That sounds really interesting. And you cite one of the big things for you were the dungeons.
Yeah.
What made the dungeons particularly special for you?
They were so unique, especially the shrinking down, where you shrink in them to go through the special holes, or then some of the dungeons you're just shrunken. There's several ones where you're mini in there, and that you're the size of a Minish, right? And that's where the boss is like. The very first boss in the first dungeon is just a slime, or I forget what they're called in that game. I don't think maybe it is slime. Blue slime? I don't remember.
I don't know.
I don't remember what that's called.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing, ones that are in Wind Waker, those floppy slimes with the little bottoms.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. Totally, yeah.
So that's actually one of the first bosses you fight, because you shrink down, and he's giant compared to you.
That's neat. Yeah, that's neat. Now, as someone, again, who has never really played Minish Cap, what do you lose, if anything, when you go small like that?
You don't really lose anything. You can still use all your abilities, all your items. But a lot of puzzles are determined on you shrinking to get through a certain area and then coming back. There's a lot of backtracking in that game, especially to the main town, to find your way around and figure out the puzzles. Because some stuff you'll see right at the beginning of the game, there's a hole there, there's a mouse hole there, I can go through there. but you can't actually go through there till almost the end of the game when you get a whole bunch of other things to go into that room, and people come and go in the town, so you can actually miss out on some stuff. Like, you really got to pay a lot of attention.
Wow, so timing is pretty crucial in this as well, it sounds like.
Yeah, like I tried to do everything that's possible. I actually rebeat that game again this year. It was the first game I beat this year.
Oh, really? Wow, cool.
Yeah.
And that's another game that's never received a remix or rehash or nothing, huh?
Just on the Game Boy. That's it.
Just on Game Boy.
But it's a Capcom game, which I never actually realized till I played it this year. It's actually
that's come up a lot. That's a Capcom game, and it's a GBA, right?
Yep. Game Boy Advance, yeah.
And that is the big green Choo Choo is what that's called.
Yes, that's Choo Choo. I was thinking slime, but yeah, Choo Choo. That is actually probably... No, my favorite boss in that game is actually the Octorok. You have to fight the frozen Octorok.
A frozen Octorok?
He's frozen, and you melt him when you see him right at the beginning when you walk in the dungeon, and you end up melting him throughout your time in the dungeon, and you're tiny, so he's a giant Octorok.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And the idea of shrinking down and getting bigger adds a lot of dimension to things. I like when games recontextualize what's already there, and when you by saying recontextualize, meaning, for example, a Minish Cap shrinking down, everything that was now manageable is now larger. Okay, how do I handle this larger thing? Which means the levels have to work on two planes, right?
Yeah.
As smaller and larger. I love when games do that. That's really cool.
There's actually a really cool thing with the Armos. I think that's how you pronounce it. They're knights in the original one, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You find that the first one you find is actually not activated, and it's blocking a path, but you can't fight it. You actually have to shrink down, go in its head, flick a switch to turn it on, and then come out, and then you can fight it.
That's cool. I see. That's cool. That's when Zelda dungeons are at their best, I think, when there's pretty clear paths. Like, even games I adore, like Link's Awakening, which I adore Link's Awakening. Some of those levels are extremely obtuse. Like most famously the tower, where you have to hit certain switches in a certain order, and if you do it wrong, you start over.
Oh, wow.
Some of those get really, really obtuse. But when Zelda hits its stride, I think, when it makes a dungeon challenging enough, but gives you enough clues to figure it out through the course of play, and allowing you to experiment and explore. Yeah. And I think that's when it sings well. And when they're unique like that, again, I'm discovering how unique the dungeons in Wind Waker are. How just fun and unique they are, because there's lots of interesting puzzles. Some of them are easy, like, light the lamps, the thing comes up. Okay, great. I've done that a million times in Zelda. But some of them are really, really, really neat puzzles.
To tell you, Minish Cap also has one of the best collection mechanics, I think, because so many of the games have, especially the later ones, have things like you either got to collect the bugs or collect this or that, right?
Right, yeah.
But Minish Cap, the kin stones you collect, you have to then find people that will fuse them with you, and it does random things throughout the world. Well, they're not actually random, like they're all pre-programmed, but it seems random at the time. That it'll tell you, like, you find green ones will give like secrets. There's one that actually make Gorons keep digging this bigger hole, the more of the Gorons you get to come, and then finally you get a prize if you get them all the way through the end. That's actually one of the most interesting parts of that game, is trying to find all the kinstones and find all the people you got to fuse them with, and unlock all the secrets.
That sounds, in the world of the game, terrifying. Imagine if you had the power by finding these stones to force these Gorons who are just like, all right, let's just dig this hole. What? And just digging more. I can't stop my arms. What's going on? No! While you're finding more and more stuff to fuse with them. Evil force.
You gotta get like 5 of them at one point, and there's like 4 of them will keep digging until you find the 5th. They'll just keep counting on the same wall.
That's grim. That's like extraordinarily grim, but that is cool from a gameplay perspective. Yeah. Collectibles really doing things in the world, because you're right, they generally don't. Like even with like Breath of the Wild and the seeds you gotta pick up, whatever those things are, I forget now. But like the seeds of this, which there's like 900 something, they don't really do anything. That's just for people who enjoy collecting and poking at the edges and finding every little thing, and that's awesome, but the idea of collecting for a end goal that is tangible to the world, that sounds awesome. That sounds really, really cool. I think Minish might be my next thing. I'm doing nothing but Zelda until the end of the year, just so I can be 100% conversant. But yeah, that's neat. right, listen, I have a lot of games to play still for this series, and it's almost over. And I still have things to do. I just finished Majora. I still need to finish Wind Waker. I gotta play Minish Cap now. There is so much to do, but before I complete any of it, it is time to thank my wonderful patrons. Starting with a brand new patron to the show, welcome Theodore LaBarbara. He joined on the $3 fan tier. Thank you so much for doing so. He joins Games with Coffee, Patrice Millette, The Let's Play Princess, BT Goebbels, Tim Knowles of The Elitist, Julian of Nerds Without Pants, Seth Sturgill of the All In Podcast, Dan of Retro Logic, Ryan Payne of Gamers Week, and the wonderful, lovely, and always smashing Pete Harney. If you would like to join these wonderful people, then sign up on patreon.com/agamerlooks4040. It's a brand new $5 tier that includes 2 bonus podcasts for your listening pleasure and patron dollars. So check those tiers out, and if anything strikes your fancy, sign up today. A much wiser podcaster than I once said, "Tall buildings cast long shadows." And what I think he meant by that was, the better the game or series, the lesser titles or elements really stand out. When you're the Legend of Zelda and you have classic upon classic upon classic in your archives, if a game is less than perfection, it's going to really stick out like a sore thumb. One of these sore thumbs, or 2 actually, are the titles on the 3DS, Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, largely regarded by the Zelda community as the lesser games in the entire franchise. Some would argue actually bad. I mean, not CDI bad, but in comparison to the Legends, not all they're cracked up to be, or at least didn't meet expectations. But that didn't stop some of my guests from sharing their opinions and thoughts on these 2 companion pieces. Alan Petrozzi and then Christian returns to share their thoughts on the game, while Phoebe returns to share an opposing view that's also a pretty rare one. Before we finish up, though, there are 2 games that you cited also as games you're not a fan of, and those are the DS ones. Which would be Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. I've played Phantom Hourglass. I almost got to the end, got sick of it. And Spirit Tracks, because I got sick of Phantom Hourglass, I said, I have no interest. What bothers you about those DS entries?
Not the graphics. Definitely not that. It's just more Wind Waker. And I think that's kind of why we look at it more fondly too, is because, they did do a hard, reset with Twilight Princess. The fans got what they wanted. And then I feel like out of spite, Nintendo was like, we're not going to fully give up on this art style, just so you know. Here's Skyward Sword, which is a half step, still in that kitty graphics. And then here's Breath of the Wild, which is kind of basically that. Mm-hmm. A little, but with an older Link. And just, more dark tones around it, but still graphically childhood graphics. Saturday morning cartoon, in a way. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's kind of what did it. Like we got exposed to it enough, and then it became a norm. And then finally, after that whole stigma, I think, left, then we could look at Wind Waker with a more objective lens of like what it does right. But anyway, back to the DS games.
Right.
So I started with Phantom Hourglass, knowing full well it was a sequel to Wind Waker. There was no way in hell I wasn't going to buy it, and there was no way in hell I wasn't going to try it and play it. But I remember really enjoying a lot of the early game of it. One of the puzzles where it was like, close your DS, that's the solution. What?
Yeah.
Very imaginative stuff.
Yeah.
But they did it again. They're like, hey, we're going to give you this dungeon that you're going to love because we're going to make you love it, or die because you're going to keep doing it over and over again. And again, I should have known this with the Hourglass, but I was really hoping the whole time that it was really just something different. That wasn't what it was, but it was, nope, we're going to time you. Great. Puzzles, timers, my favorite thing. Love it. No, not really.
Love it.
So I didn't get very far. I think I quit after the second return.
I made it through, and I would love to fire up an old save and see exactly how far I got. I think I got, because you have to do that like 4 or 5 times throughout the game, and every time you go into that like cloister of trials or whatever they call it, it's that you have. They add on another piece of a puzzle. They add on another layer and then another layer.
Did they give you more time?
You still,
is it at the same time? I don't remember.
I think they give you a bit more time because it would just be unfair if they didn't. But there's also more mechanics. And I remember getting to a point where I had to go through like 5 levels of this. And it was the 5th time I had to go through the same thing. And then I said, you know what? This is not exactly what you said earlier. I put more time into it and then said, yeah, this is not worth it at all. Like, I don't care about this ending anymore. I don't care about this game. And I just punched out. And that's exactly.
You made me notice something that I'm very, very keen on what I don't like in my video games. I quit them way earlier than I think.
Yeah, and I hang
do.
with them a bit. Yeah, I hang with them a bit more. But as I'm getting older, though, that's changing a lot because time is so precious at this point. If I'm not having a good time, a game has a very short rope. Very off topic. I played the game Pyre about a year or so ago, and I got about 10 hours in, and I realized I wasn't having a very good time, and then I stopped. It was one of those I felt no problem. Like, I get what this game's trying to do.
Dark Souls 2
I love
for me.
Supergiant games. See, there you go. And it was like, you know what? I don't need to see the ending of this. That's fine. And I'm done. So, but back then when I was playing this, again, this was probably 10 years ago at this point, probably. I just hit that wall, and I thought the seafaring was fun. I thought the cannons were neat. The art style was cool, and the little islands were fun, but I just that was the barrier for me. Again, I never tried Spirit Tracks. Is Spirit Tracks more of the same, or?
I remember when I closed that clamshell for the last time on that game, and I was like, maybe they'll do better on the next one. I do remember that. I'm like, maybe next time, Alan. They'll get it next time. This was their test. They'll always do another one. And then the other one came. True. And when I heard the title and I heard the motif, as an avid Thomas the Tank Engine fan as a child as well, there was no way I wasn't going to buy it. There wasn't any way I wasn't going to try it. And I had immense fun with that. I mean, there's going to be an inherent amount of strict movement when you're dealing with trains. I think that their method was as well as I guess you could do with that, outside of like pretending that like the tracks manifest under you as you go and lets you still run around freely, I guess. I don't know how that would work.
Yeah, sure.
So there was no way it wasn't going to be on rails anyway. But I think having like the motif and all that was okay. The problem was the dungeons again.
Again with the
darn dungeons. They haven't figured out how to make those ones as fun somehow. At that point, I remember when I finally stopped with that game and being like, again, it's repetitive and not fun. The train stuff doesn't really, unfortunately, do as much as I was hoping as it would to carry it.
Mm-hmm.
Why couldn't they have just given it to Capcom? They had a good track record. They did it twice. They made good games twice. No, 3 times. Minish Cap.
Yeah.
Which is another one I love very much. And again, they didn't deliver. And I was very bummed. I could say that. Yeah, I loved what they did with Zelda. Like everything about like having like it was such a nice fresh twist to be like, oh, she's dead. You failed. You failed without not even having to touch a button. Let's just see where it goes from here. It was a very cool touch. A very nice, fresh change of pace for me. But I didn't care.
Absolutely.
I couldn't care enough somehow because the dungeons stopped me from that. And I should have looked up like something, maybe a Let's Play or something, but I never did. Be curious to know what happened. I know you fight a monster train. Sounds badass. Don't care enough to get to it.
That sounds pretty cool. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to make a suplex joke, but we can all write that joke in our heads.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we can. You can all write that. It's just one of those games I just don't have a fondness for, really. The DS version of the games are just it's the dungeons that killed it.
They didn't even save it by making a manga adaptation to read.
Not even a manga. Not even that.
I would have loved to have just been like, here's the cliff notes, sir, but in a fun presentation.
Link's Awakening to a game you mentioned that you don't like very much, and there's a lot of there's the sentiment you're not alone in this in this thought process or belief. Spirit Tracks.
Oh yeah,
you are not a fan of Spirit Tracks. Now I've never played it. I've played Phantom Hourglass. I didn't love Phantom Hourglass, so I skipped Spirit Tracks. So tell me a bit about your experience with it and why you kind of bounced off.
Spirit Tracks is interesting as a contrast to Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, because while The Adventure of Link has really intense friction associated with it, it's a very difficult game. Spirit Tracks, by contrast, is a very boring game. You spend so much time in that train, and the music is so good. Like, the music while you're exploring around the world in that train is really nice.
Right.
And the art direction's really nice. But there's just nothing between it. Like the dungeons are slow. You have to keep revisiting, a central location, kind of like Phantom Hourglass.
Sure.
But it is tragically boring. I wish I could remember with more specificity what bummed me out about it. But it's all just rain off a duck's back, I barely remember anything about it except that I was constantly in that train.
And that could be one of the biggest always on the train.
Oh yeah.
That could be one of the biggest crimes a Zelda game can commit, or really any game. And I'll extend that to any real art or medium, is if it leaves a sum zero effect on you, where it's not good enough to be memorable or not bad enough to be thought about or memorable or bad enough to be memorable. If it's sum zero, then it's just it has almost, I don't say valueless, because I'm sure people enjoy the game, but for you, it's like, I just don't even remember playing it. There was a train, there's a couple dungeons, a central point. I don't know. And I think that big exhale is what I'm hearing from a lot of people is, I don't know, I just kind of there.
It's not terrible. It's very competently made. I mean, this is Nintendo in the late 2000s. They'd mastered the DS technology. So it's very competently made. Although I will say, I seem to recall grappling with the controls a little bit more than I did in Phantom Hourglass, just because there's a cool mechanic at the heart of it, which is switching between Zelda and Link and using like Zelda in this kind of phantom form, which I think is a really great idea. But in practice, the touch panel lacks a bit of the precision that you need. So you're constantly doing the wrong thing and getting setbacks and so forth. It's a real kind of failed concept.
That's interesting. It just sounds like, Phantom Hourglass I liked okay.
Yeah, I liked it too.
So I got to the very, very end where it had me, again, repetition, do that same trials. There was like a cloister, I think, of trials.
Oh, yeah.
I had to do those same levels over, and I was like, you know what? I'm not having fun anymore. And that's my litmus. If I'm not having fun anymore, then I've gotten very good at just saying, all right, well, moving on. Okay, well, that's... Time is precious. The moon is descending upon me as Ala Majora.
Precisely.
So I'm just gonna leave it there. So you did also mention the 3DS games, Spirit Tracks and Phantom Hourglass. Did you finish those as well? Or are those games you're familiar with and have experience with?
I almost finished Spirit Tracks, but that was another game that I was borrowing from somebody, sadly, so I never was able to. But Spirit Tracks and Phantom Hourglass are actually very good. I think they get less love than they deserve, especially with the continuing story that's going on there, because in Phantom Hourglass, for those who aren't aware, there is a character that's kind of your secondary throughout the entire game. And in Spirit Tracks, much like all of Zelda games, it's a different incarnation of Link. And about 80 years or something have passed. That same character is an old man, and as an NPC, he's just like, Wait a minute. You look vaguely familiar.
Really? I don't remember this. I played a lot of Phantom Hourglass. I never picked up Spirit Tracks because I
want to say his name is Lineback.
That sounds really familiar. Yeah, that sounds super familiar. I remember Phantom Hourglass. I remember liking it and playing it quite a bit until I hated it. And I think it was the whole, I don't know if they called it cloisters, but the trials where you had to go through the same thing over and over again. You had those like beasts you had to stealth around. And yeah, I remember having to do that over and over again and just not enjoying it. And just
and the Phantom Hourglass itself is ticking down time.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Oh,
I remember the place I got really stuck in that was you're supposed to close the DS so that way the map gets pressed with the stone or something.
Yes.
And that tricked me for the longest time. I was like, what are you supposed to do here? What does it mean, press it? I'm pressing every button.
Oh, that's so funny. Yes, I do remember that. How silly was that? That's kind of like the, Star Tropics, where you have to have like the manual and submerge it in water to make a code appear.
Oh my God, I know what you're talking about. Or Metal Gear Solid, when they say that the codec number is on the back of the CD case. And I was just checking my inventory going, I never grabbed a CD case. Did I miss something? And about a week later, I was like, wait a minute. And I turned to the the CD cover that the game actually came in with, and I was like, that's brilliant.
It's brilliant, but annoying because if you borrowed that game, you may not have the cover, and or you rented it, from a rental store that didn't have just a regular box. You would never know.
Or I want to say the HD remasters, at the very least, or for the Twin Snakes, has it on the back still.
Yeah, I don't remember. I think I was the PlayStation 3. They had the Kojima collection where they had all the Kojima Metal Gears, and I don't remember. But it was one of those things you just know now, just being around games. Like, oh, yeah, I gotta, I know what these codecs are. Okay, haha.
I could not imagine emulating that game.
Imagine that. Imagine, I'm just being stuck. Or even, how would you emulate, Spirit Tracks or Phantom Hourglass? Close a 3DS. What? How? How am I going to do this? I can't.
They must have made a patch for that or something.
There has to be a workaround of some sort or way. That's really, really good. I just remember I didn't mind using the stylus to control Link too bad. I thought it was fine in those games.
Yeah, it definitely works. And you're not used to it. You're so used to using a D-pad to control him, but once you get about 5 minutes into the game, it just feels natural.
I agree. I think it works. It works as well as you would expect, and it's actually surprising considering, we don't love, as gamer people, we don't love non-traditional controls too much. We're not a fan of waggling sticks. We're not a fan of styluses, but for some reason that works very well.
And nowadays we absolutely are, it seems, because everybody has a VR headset.
This is very true. I don't have a VR headset. They make me wonky. I don't like them. But I haven't tried them in a number of years. I hear they're improving, so maybe one day I'll bite the bullet on the VR thing. As I continue through this Legend of Zelda series and I can finally see the light at the end of the tunnel, I'm noticing one very interesting truth, and it's something I'm going to discuss in a later episode when I talk about Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword. It's hard to find people to talk about newer games. And that's not to say there aren't fans. There's plenty of fans of Breath of the Wild. There's plenty of fans of these games. But no one's really nostalgic about it. Nobody is nostalgic about Skyward Sword, a game that was re-released a few years ago on the Switch. Nobody has moments of Breath of the Wild, at least in my circle, that impacted them in a profound way. There are some stories woven through there, but it's not like Link to the Past. So as I get further and further forward with these newer games, The topics tend to be more about look and feel and play as opposed to recollections. And as anybody who listens to this show knows, it's really singing when we're talking about those long, fond memories. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't give it a try. One of the most recent games in the handheld Zelda canon is Link Between Worlds, and for me personally, it's one of the best. I adore this game, and if you're a fan of Link to the Past and for some reason skip past it, I think you got like a week or so left to pick this up on your 3DS, I think, as of this recording, because it really is worth a spin, and it's one of those games I really hope shows up on the Switch at some point in some remaster. It's a joy. To continue this conversation, Christian closes out the show with some thoughts about this fantastic title and what it means to be a gameplay successor to one of the greatest Zelda games ever made. It sounds like it really didn't get its hooks into you until you played Link Between Worlds.
Yeah, strangely enough. The Ocarina of Time was the exception. That was the one that I really enjoyed before, say, 2015 or so. But it was Link Between Worlds that really served as a gateway to the series for me.
What about Link Between Worlds did it for you? What was you? Because you said that it felt like what you always wanted a top-down Zelda to be. What was that? What was that aspect that it provided that it gave you to make it to hit that mark?
Honestly, I think the biggest thing is how forgiving it is. Which is a strange thing maybe to find appealing, because I do like challenge in games. I'm certainly a big advocate for accessibility options and games being made as accessible to as many people as possible. But also I like me a Celeste, you know, I like a Dark Souls, that sort of thing. I like a tough, challenging game. And yet Link Between Worlds just kind of, it almost serves as a prototype, a kind of a backdoor prototype for Breath of the Wild in a way, because it basically opens up its world for you to go in one of a bunch of different directions, depending on which tool is most appealing to you or which area is most appealing to you. And even just simple things, fundamental things, down to the enemy hitboxes, how accessible heart containers and so forth and upgrades are. It's a little more player-friendly, I would say, than most of the preceding games. Though, if I'm being honest, if I had gotten to Minish Cap first, that may have been the entry to the series for me.
Yeah, I hear. So, again, Minish Cap is one of those I've yet to play. I have a few holes still that I'm trying to plug through. Wind Waker is the one I'm working through now.
Yeah, what a hoot.
I adore it. I just, it's so joyful and wonderful. I will say, though, Link Between Worlds, a lot of people will put Link to the Past as a top 3 Zelda game. If you put it as like number 3, then Link Between Worlds should be number 4, because it's just such a spiritual successor to that original game, and I adore it too. I played it upon release, and
nice.
I just fell absolutely head over heels with that top-down experience. The one thing that always struck me about that game is the ability to go back and forth between the worlds wherever you wanted. With that. What else do you feel Link Between Worlds, what else do you feel that title, I want to say, innovates on or improves upon the formulas from the games before that make it so successful?
The non-linearity is a big thing. And that's the game's strength and its weakness. Because interrogating these games really closely, there are some things that maybe appeal to you, but you can also see the downside too. And so one of the issues with Link Between Worlds is that any given dungeon can only account for the item that's used to get into it, which is it's a constraint on its puzzle system. But I wonder if it also, sometimes constraints are really good for art. And so I wonder if that constraint served to have the developers really tease out every possible permutation of a puzzle using a given tool. And work those into the dungeons, because I just find the dungeons in that to be much more engaging than most 2D Zelda dungeons. I think 3D Zelda dungeons, broadly speaking, are better than the 2D ones, but Link Between Worlds really has the best 2D Zelda dungeons to me, just because they're so in depth with the single tool.
And there you have it. After almost 3 hours of Majora's Mask content, spanning 2 parts of an episode with a third part coming later on this year, having a manageable hour-long episode seems to really fit the vibe of handheld games. Small, manageable content for small, manageable titles, for the most part. But one thing that really struck me as I was finishing up the editing of this episode and here at the tail end, ready to close it all up with a nice green bow, is not everything has to be a hit. I've said this before on different venues and shows, and maybe even this show, there's joy to be found in the 6s and the 7s in the world of game reviews and online opinion. Just because something is a 7 doesn't mean it's bad. It means it's fine. And there could be a lot of joy and fun to be found in those finds. Not everything we play has to be the greatest game ever made. We don't have to all be playing 9s and 10s. And in the world of The Legend of Zelda, where everything has at least a base level of quality, maybe some of these handheld games are 8s and 7s, maybe even 6s. But that doesn't mean they don't belong in the overall fabric and the overall canon of the Legend of Zelda series. And that certainly doesn't mean that they are not worth playing. As of the recording of this episode, many of the games we've discussed, especially Minish Cap and Oracle, are now going to be available on the Switch Online, and I cannot wait to play this via that service, and I highly recommend you do so as well, because even if they're not Ocarina or Majora or Link to the Past or Breath of the Wild, they are still worth exploring and enjoying. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of A Gamer Looks at 40. If you like Zelda, there's almost 6 months worth of episodes already in the archives ready for you to ingest and hopefully enjoy. Please tell a friend if you've enjoyed this show so far. Any support would be greatly appreciated. And until next time, seek out those B-sides. They're often just as fun as the hits.